Okay, so we're live. So if you are thinking about expanding into the European Union or the UK, or you're just somewhere thinking about, I am in the European Union or the UK, but I just want to make sure my products are compliant, then you're definitely going to want to watch this session with Riki Hooker. Riki Hooker from Global E-commerce Experts. So, Riki, first off, thank you for joining us here
Thanks
for
for having
this
me.
live stream. Yes. So appreciate it. And so we're live right now. And I know folks are going to have some questions about making sure that they are compliant, either that they're there now and they want to make sure their product stays for sale, or they're thinking about going into an international marketplace and they just want to make sure that they've got their ducks in a row as they launch. So, do you mind just real quick introducing yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Riki Hooker. I'm the general manager here at Global E-commerce Experts. We're a UK and Netherlands, so European Union based one-stop shop service provider for e-commerce brands who from outside of the region who want to grow their sales and businesses inside the UK and the EU. So we have a range of different services as a single point of contact that includes compliance and fulfillment, market research, tax compliance, etc., right the way through to multi-marketplace approaches and different countries within the region. So we help e-commerce businesses expand.
Awesome. And that's what we're going to be talking about, because at the end of the day, everybody wants to have more sales. And so part of me would say we probably have a very American audience, but sometimes people are joining us from other places such as LA and Lee, or if I said that, La and Lai, or however you say that, is joining us. Anat is joining us from Israel. So thank you for joining us all the way from Israel. So I know we have a lot of people, whether they're in the United States or not, they're probably selling in the US. The US, we think, is this ultra litigious, very rule-based society, but then we come to realize in some places, maybe whether it's more or less rules, it could be a little different. So do you mind just describing real quick, what are some general differences in the rules, especially when it comes to product compliance for folks as they sell in the UK or European Union?
Yeah, I mean, predominantly, Kevin, items and products that are safe to sell in the United States and or are safe to sell in developed countries where there's core e-commerce trade. Generally speaking, those products, one way or another, are going to be okay, generally speaking, to sell across the world, so long as you go through a process of ensuring that you've done the due diligence on certain items, which certain ingredients and things like that may well be contraband. But fundamentally, we're not talking about insurmountable challenges here.
Right.
The regulations that protect US citizens are there for a reason, to protect the consumer. And similar regulations exist in the UK and the EU. And right the way through this conversation, I'll split those two pieces in half. Since the United Kingdom left the European Union, they're two separate places. We still talk about them as Europe as one geographic region, but we are talking about two separate markets here. And you do have to ensure that you're compliant and comply to regulations in both of those places independently. So, but in terms of the key differences, there are some key ingredients, regulations, and standards which need to be adhered to in the UK that you won't have come across in the US. That's different to, will my product be safe? Because generally, the consumer regulations that protect Americans and Israelis and Australians and Japanese consumers have been put there to protect them, and they're not dissimilar in terms of the needs. So this is about how your product's been certified, how it's been tested to make sure that it's there if that's bits required, and therefore really what bits of paper you need to prove that it's compliant for sale in that particular place.
And that's a good point. What it comes down to is the general philosophy behind the laws are going to be pretty similar. Like the US and the UK are both based on English common law. So there is that sense that, the backbone is similar, but maybe the shirt it wears is a little different because...
Yes, the wording's definitely different.
Yeah, the wording's different. But the general philosophy behind it is going to be similar. It's just you may have to fill out a different form or
Yes.
different, whatever the case is. So that's a good way to look at it. So I know you put together some slides to kind of help folks with figuring out, like, does their product even need to worry about this? Because not all products necessarily have to worry about product compliance.
Right.
But it's good to at least have a sense of, are there certain products that do require compliance?
Yeah, sure. Well, let me start by perhaps explaining where the compliance piece fits in the pathway, because actually there's two different listeners to a session like this.
Mm-hmm.
There's sellers who are curious about expanding to Europe,
Mm-hmm.
and they may be setting out on this well-trodden journey of doing some research and then going to market by being compliant before they get there. There's also going to be sellers, I'm sure, who are already trading in the area and have come across specific challenges. Maybe some of their products have been taken down, and they're now researching, what the heck do I have to do here to be able to get that degree of compliance. So it's worth noting that in the expansion journey that global e-commerce experts would recommend, the compliance piece, that product compliance, is right at the beginning. You're going to take a look to make sure your products are okay and legal to be able to sell in the region, and that you've done you've got the right set of paperwork together from a responsible person perspective to be able to go ahead and do that. So
awesome.
Just wanted to kind of see where that bit fits in. This should be quite early on in your research.
Okay.
So, sorry, I went a bit too far there. So what we're talking about here is label compliance. Now, for a lot of sellers, that becomes quite a confusing statement, because the label is the piece and the document and the only thing which is on the product which gives indication of what kind of product compliance is required. Earlier on in the life of the product, when it's being imported, its commodity code, perhaps its importation regulations, they'll be a part of it. When it comes to perhaps selling on an online marketplace, putting your goods onto Amazon, for instance, all that Amazon has got to go on, whether your product is compliant to sell on the market, is its label. So the label becomes a crucial piece in the process of, can I or can't I, and am I okay to, am I legal, am I ready to go to market, am I ready to trade? We spend a lot of time with our clients running through the detail of making them RTT, ready to trade. We do that by checking their labels. And that might be batches for parent SKUs. That might be certain specific commodity codes. That might be it's particular products. That might be all of their products. But what we'll do is we'll take a look at the label to check that the regulations surrounding the sale of that particular product is applicable to the market in the United Kingdom and the EU. Since the UK left the European Union, and it had very harmonized regulations, they were pretty much the same. Well, they were the same because we were in Europe. Since then, the law is changing and reviewing as the UK is kind of deviating from the EU. But fundamentally, the processes are in place to protect the consumer, and they're along the same kind of lines. So typically, a product that was valid for sale in the UK would be valid for sale in Europe, and vice versa. Although that does need to be reviewed from time to time. But essentially, the label piece is what everybody needs. Everybody needs to have their labels checked and be compliant, even if the output from that check is that there's no further regulation required to make you able to trade. So in the course of making e-commerce sellers ready to trade in the UK and EU, we and a number of other organizations would prepare a label check.
Got it. And generally speaking, we're talking about the types of products that would be ingested, go into the mouth, go on the skin, make any sort of health claims, or
exactly that.
Plugged in, right. Or have a battery.
Yeah, so those typically type of products. Hazardous products, metallics, plastics, things that are going to be eaten, organic claimed things like that, cosmetics. Most products he said most products are under the category of just general products that don't require any kind of regulation, any kind of labels, any kind of safety symbols, anything along those lines.
So if I'm selling Post-it notes or a version of sticky adhesive paper,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have to necessarily worry about product compliance, or I should probably at least look into it. But the chances are, I
No,
probably
you might
don't have
have
a
your label
requirement.
checked to find out that there is no that there's no further requirements beyond maybe well, all products will need an address of where they're sold.
Mm-hmm.
So the recommendation would be just needs an address within the UK and the EU. And oh, by the way, your barcodes that you use at home in the US, fortunately, they're not going to work in Europe. So you'll need to change those or overlay them with a
Mm-hmm.
different GS configuration to make the barcodes work there. You might already have those at home, the right GS configuration, and you'll just be able to run with your barcodes as is. It depends on how long the product's been on the market and how long you've been using those barcodes for.
Okay.
Certainly when it comes to medical products, things are getting a lot more medical devices, medical products, things are getting a lot more involved because you need to have specific trials and things relating to those. But those trials and things exist back home as well. So you'll
Mm-hmm.
use all of that source data that you've used to be able to put that part into perspective. The other piece which is interesting is cosmetics. They've got to have this information file again. The US needs it. It just needs to be just needs to be ratified and checked before it can go on the market in the UK. With things like what's in them, how they've been tested,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. And what's really important is is things like cosmetics and indeed medical devices and things. They need to go onto a specific register where they're sold.
Mm-hmm.
So you need someone to represent you for those particular products. I'm starting with the worst, and I'm gonna end up with the easiest ones.
Okay,
Cosmetics
So
and
now we're talking kind of worst case scenario from a product
yeah,
compliance
we're
standpoint,
starting from
because
the
this
worst,
doesn't
and we're
sound
ending
so
up.
bad right now.
We're going to end up with the post-it notes, yeah.
Okay, got it.
So the other thing to consider is if you're selling food supplements and
Mm-hmm.
products, they'll certainly need to have things like health claims checked. There is a difference here between the US market and the UK and the EU. That in the US you can make claims about what something will do, irrespective of whether that's well, as Brits we would say whether that was true or not. But irrespective of that being independently ratified that was something that was so especially when it comes to food supplements, that's not allowed in the UK. So it's very often for us to recommend that certain claims are removed if they can't be backed up by facts, that they're removed from labels. Best, largest, longest, most active, those types of claims, they have to be ratified. So things like that, especially when it comes to things like daily allowances or values, things like that, those things have to be approved before they can be put on there. And for non-medicinal supplements, that's very
Mm-hmm.
often somewhere where the sellers find that they need to be over labeling or changing the labels for sale into the region. And look, hey, let's put this in perspective. We are talking about what's on the label for it to be compliant.
Mm-hmm.
It's very unusual for us to find that products themselves are not
Mm-hmm.
allowed. There are some vitamins, minerals, amounts that are allowed, ingredients that are allowed in products, but typically this is about how it's being claimed rather than the thing itself. You'd know very early on at the point of import whether or not your product itself had contraband ingredients. Product
Got it. But
marking,
going back to what you said about the health claims or the claims
yeah,
you make on the label have to be independently verified. So, if it says, vitamin C boosts immunity, I'm just made that up at the top of my head. But like,
yes.
if you made that, do you have to have a study that you paid for that proves vitamin C? Or can you
Um,
say,
it
according
just
to
has to
Harvard
be Yeah, it
University?
has to be independently verified. So you would have to say on the label, you'd have to show the source, almost like you do at the bottom of a Wikipedia page. You've got to
Got it.
show
Got it. So it's kind of like your term paper. You have to cite your
exactly.
sources.
You've got to cite your
Okay.
sources that are independently verified.
Mm.
Moving then on to what we call CE, which is a European certification, which is the UK certification and the European certification. These are for products which have to be tested for their safety. and product marking means that it's been tested by a specific government-sanctioned independent body. It comes to things like toys, comes to what else, like electrical items, those types of products that need to have a CE mark, and that would show up on your label check that your item needs to be CE marked. Now,
so
typically,
do you have an example of what that looks like?
The mark itself, yeah, the mark itself is it's actually at the bottom of this slide here.
Oh, I don't see the slide. I just see your PowerPoint.
Okay, yeah, at the bottom of the slide here, the PowerPoint, you should have for a UK CA and the CE mark. That's what that
No,
label
I see EU
is.
expansion pathway with a honeycomb.
Oh my goodness, I'm running through the slides here. So sorry. Let me.
Oh no, that's okay. Oh, there we go. CE marking. Got it. Okay,
Yeah.
now it makes more sense.
The CE marking is what we is in UK and Europe what's used to show that an item has been independently tested for some types of products. So toys, electrical items, they're required to be CE tested. It's very common for that testing to be done at home before you come. There's lots of places in the United States, there's lots of places in Asia and China which will do that on your behalf, and you'll take your product, you'll send your product to there for specific testing, and they'll give you a certificate that you have at the point of import, which shows you that your product is ready for sale. Some of that, the requirement for that will come out on your label check very early on, whether you need it. It's a relatively inexpensive and easy thing to get hold of, assuming your product is safe after all. We're always assuming here, Kevin, that your product is safe for sale because you're
if
already
you're selling
selling
in the US,
you're already selling it in the US.
You probably went through some of these hoops.
Yeah, absolutely.
Slightly differently.
Let me just run back to here. So that gives you an indication of the types of products. Beyond that, we don't actually need any further product compliance requirements beyond everyone needs the address. So everybody needs to have an address on their product for the UK and in the EU. So you'll need what's called responsible persons service, which is where an organization provides you with their address, and in return for a fee, they take some degree of responsibility on your behalf, a bit like your 3PL third-party logistics provider will take responsibility for fulfilling your orders when you sell things. The responsible person will take a degree of responsibility for providing the service in the event that the goods in that particular country are scrutinized by the trading standard body in the UK or in the EU. So Global E-commerce Experts provides responsible person service for thousands of sellers, and in return for that, we collect, maintain, and make ready all of the compliance-based paperwork, documentation, certificates, and label checks, and a sample of the products. And we keep those in our warehouse here in the UK and in the Netherlands. So in the event that there's a claim against the label by the certified bodies in those countries, a trading standard, or by whichever type of body might challenge that. Very often it's Amazon. Amazon have its own internal compliance team. If you're selling on an online marketplace, so do eBay. They're increasingly hot on product compliance because they share some responsibility as well. That's been really pushed on them by the governments of those countries, that they share by taking those items to market. They share some responsibility. And in those situations, you would then your responsible person would then be able to act on your behalf by providing that information to that trading body, to be able to say, yeah, look, here's the CE certificate, here's the product information files, here are the label checks, this seller is legitimate, they've done the job, and they're using the address service for of our address to be able to represent them. So we're not actually, as a responsible person, you're not actually taking full product liability. That product liability remains with the seller, and the seller is overseas, but it acts in a third party capacity to be able to comply with the regulations.
So basically someone who's responsible for answering questions regarding product compliance within the country. So at least there's somewhere whether Amazon or a governing body can go. within
I mean, if you could imagine the Wild West of e-commerce
Mhm.
6-7 years ago,
Mhm.
and some marketplaces were, let's face it, a little bit out of control. There were sellers
Right.
coming from outside the region, sending drop shipping products under the customs radar because they were, below a certain amount,
Mhm.
dropping goods into the country with no warranty or indemnity, no safety certification, no comeback, no consumer rights whatsoever.
Mm.
It really was the Wild West, and there was nothing that these governments could do about it because the legislation and consumer regulations was 20 years out of date and was
Right.
relating on someone taking something back to a physical bricks and mortar store.
Right.
And so much has changed in terms of clamping down on international sales. Well, no, not clamping down, protecting the global
Mhm.
economy when it comes to sellers selling overseas, and making sure that goods that are sold in a country, if you want to take your American or Israeli or Australian or Japanese e-commerce business or Chinese business, and you want to come to sell in Europe, you need to make sure that you're complying to the legislation in those countries, or it really, you won't sell very much for very long, because it's becoming increasingly difficult for it's not black hat by any trade, but from a compliance perspective,
Mhm.
these less responsible traders are becoming under increasing pressure to those listings are being taken down. So it's a good thing for e-commerce. It's a good thing for consumers, and it's certainly a
Mhm.
good thing for the governments in those countries. And it's exactly the same when it comes to, for instance, Kevin, tax compliance. I know that you've done
Mm.
some great sessions. I've been watching some of the great sessions you've already done on tax compliance. It's exactly the same. Those governments want to make
Mhm.
sure that taxes are being paid properly in those countries. They're not talking about individual taxes. They're only talking about sales taxes,
Right.
um, and that those things are imported and exported properly. So this is really just under the same umbrella.
Got it. Got it. So it all comes down to, you might potentially have some sort of product compliance. And if you do, you need somebody to basically check the label, be a responsible person. Now, I'm assuming you're saying you don't need a responsible person if, say, you're selling the Post-it notes that don't have a product
Well, you'd
compliance.
still need an address. Yeah, you'd still need an address, but the address service is, it's a couple of $100 a year for all of that information to be put together and for you to have that address in the area. So we're not talking a huge amount of money here,
Okay.
and because there's still some documentation to show the labels have been checked, and you don't need any further information.
Mm-hmm.
You've done those things, because the online marketplaces will want to see the responsible person. Some products currently only need the address. And as a seller on Amazon, currently for those general products, Amazon's not pushing back on on the address being outside of the UK. But increasingly, as new products are listed and new SKUs are being listed, Amazon in particular is now mandating the address much more widely than it was
Mm.
before.
Got it.
There's one other piece to um, product compliance, which happens quite early on. I actually haven't got any slides for that, so I will come back to what the label review looks like in a second. But there is one extra piece which you may well have touched on in other sessions, but is the EPR regulations for certain countries in Europe, and these are a kind of tax that you have to pay at the point of import, which is an environmental permitting regulation. So if for certain products like electrical items and products with significant packaging, you actually have to pay a charge based on the weight of the packaging and the type of equipment that you have, for effectively its end of life. You have to do that at the point of entrance, and you have to pay a few euros or a few pounds at the point that you import the goods into the country, which contributes to the end of life cost of those particular items
Yeah,
specifically.
I found EPR is not all that expensive.
No, it's not expensive.
It's
It's
just
not
an
expensive.
annoyance of,
Yeah,
you're
it's
kind
one.
of,
It's something you've got to go ahead and register. So, and
yes.
it's one of those things that sits under the product compliance umbrella, which I thought worth touching on.
Oh, it's definitely, yeah. And we're talking,
Yeah,
EPR is a German and French thing. It's not
it's
necessarily
just
a
German and
UK
French at the
thing.
moment. Yeah, it's just German and
Right.
French at the moment
I like the at the moment.
Yes, well, toward the beginning of Q1 in 2023, we'll start seeing it in other countries in the EU, starting with Belgium and the Netherlands, and then it will also be rocking through into the UK, probably not until till this time next year. Excuse me.
Oh, interesting.
So it is at the moment. It is the French and the Germans are kind of piloting this European regulation to begin with, and then it will roll out across the course of the rest of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
But like you say,
Okay.
it's inexpensive. It's just a piece of the puzzle that needs to happen before you can trade. Yeah, you can use an agent, pay them pay them a fee, get them to do it for you, or you can go through the process of registering that yourself if you're really bootstrapping your expansion, and go through that process yourself. It's not insurmountable for a seller in the same way as you might handle your own taxes at home. It really is. It's a taxation that you need to register for using your registration numbers, your ERA number, and your tax number in those particular countries.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I just wanted to kind of come back to what the process of the label check is because we talked about this label check.
Okay.
But it is just interesting in touching on what that looks like, because there's two pieces to this. There's a review of your labels where you pay a charge as part of your expansion investment to have your labels reviewed for the region. Beyond that, you might then also need to then redesign, either through over labeling, sticking a label on the top of your existing products, or redesigning, or having a batch of product that you are sending to the region for sale in this region made with the correct label. On some sellers will put a peel and reveal label on top, because if they're going to sell in Europe that I haven't touched on yet, you have to have your label and your product information, especially safety information, must be in the language that the country of you're selling it is. So if you are going to sell in the EU under Amazon's Pan EU program, for instance, you would need to provide safety-based instructions for products in all languages. So there is often some there are some workarounds, with QR codes and URLs to be able to direct the buyers to foreign language versions of that detail. So there are some ways around it, but safety information, especially critical safety information, must be displayed in multiple languages. So it's very common for products that require this to be overlaid with a peel and reveal label before they arrive into the UK or the EU that opens out with different languages on them. So those translation pieces become quite important for certain products, and that comes out through the course of the review. So a typical expansion, they'll review their product, review their labels. There'll be a list of recommendations, do the redesign on those recommendations, and then we can either final do the review or can go straight to market if you've just ticked all the boxes.
Got it. So you may have to overlay with a different label the whatever you're selling in the EU or the
some
UK.
sellers stick another label on top. Mm-hmm. Some sellers order a batch from their manufacturer with the new label on it so that it's ready to go. Some sellers will just leave the existing label and put one by the side of it so that it's got both. It just depends on the size of the product, what's required in the recommendations, and indeed if they're already in the market. Very often we'll hear from sellers who are already in the marketplace and their items have been taken down, and Amazon will recommend them to a specialist like Global E-commerce Experts and say you need to talk to these guys to help you out. And then we'll be kind of backing up the bus a little bit to say, right, what do we need to do? How we might need to remove your products if they're in FBA. It starts getting expensive, but it's that or a bunch of product. In the worst case scenario, a bunch of product in a continent that you don't live, that there's a long way away from you. That's a bunch of money that you've worked so damn hard to earn for stock that you can't sell. So we provide a kind of rescue service in equal measures to those new sellers who are expanding to new markets.
Got it. So as you're expanding into new markets, and if you have any of these, especially products that might have any sort of safety information, the safety information you need to have translated.
Yeah, that's the key part. I mean, all of the requirements would all come out on the initial review. That's the crucial part.
Hmm.
To review your products, especially your, some sellers don't review all of their SKUs. They might have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. So what they'll do is they'll
Sure.
say, right, we're going to do a product, we're going to do a label review on our top 20, and then we're going to translate the recommendations from those top 20 that we know are safe onto the rest of them, because you very quickly see some commonality to to the types of things that need to be on label. Okay, I'm going to do another label review to find out that I need an address and my barcode's not valid, or
Right.
my ingredients are in a metric because I sell them in the US. Sorry, are in imperial, and I need to make them all into metric because ingredients have to be in metric measures. So things like that would be very common throughout your product SKUs.
Hmm. Got it. Okay. So as someone's looking at your label to see if anything needs to change, especially if it's in one of these highly uh, compliance driven categories, um, then you can start making some changes. But the good news is we're not talking about having to redesign the product itself.
No,
We're talking
very,
about
very
potentially
rarely.
changing
Very
packaging.
rarely, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
So we're talking about
packaging or
changing.
labels, or maybe some testing to show that things are compliant. Like I said right back at the beginning, Kevin, it's
Mhm.
very unusual for something not to be allowed. We have some supplements that's got some ingredients in that are not allowed. Um, some odd food colors that are in candy that's allowed in the US, not allowed in Europe at all, like
Mm,
total contraband.
sure.
And I mean, that's only the same if you were selling in on Amazon. You decided that you wanted to expand your business and sell on Amazon in the UAE, for instance. There's a fair amount of contraband there, as you can imagine,
Mm,
in a country like the United Arab Emirates that's still selling on Amazon. So you just need to check those things. But typically, the EU and the UK markets are friendly
mhm.
to the types of products which are already approved for sale in other Western countries like the US and Canada, for instance.
Yeah, exactly. And I've even seen folks who at times they go to, like, let's say Europe or the UK, and they realize they're going to have to make some changes to the packaging. They just make changes that are basically, it depends on the product, but they make changes that are compliant, like for the US and the UK, so that they don't
Yeah,
have to
that's
have
very
to go.
common that people that sellers choose choose to sell internationally,
Hmm.
and they then make an internationally compliant product, and they'll just make their labels compliant for both places, because it doesn't hurt for that compliance to be in both. There hasn't, I've come across, been instances where something that's not allowed in the US is allowed in the UK and EU, for instance, that they're in conflict. Um, so yeah, I mean that is typically the way that they'll go about doing it. Redesign the label in its entirety for the fact that they're a global e-commerce seller.
Hmm.
And they're now active in the Europe and the UK. It's all and in the US. It's also very common for a seller to do a Euro batch. That, although you have to be quite careful with that, because we tend to find quite a lot of conflicts on that front, whereby a seller will have a particular SKU, and then they'll sub SKU their European labeled products because they've got a European label on. So internally in their own organization, they sub SKU the
Uh-huh.
European specification, and then it plays havoc with their listings, because in effect they've got
Mm.
two SKUs the same on online marketplace, but internally on their own warehouse management system, for instance, they might end up having two different SKUs. So you have to take some care with that at the same time.
Got it. I mean, although technically you can have a different SKU for the same ASIN in the UK than you do the US, but
Yeah,
if you
you
create a
can.
different listing,
Exactly
then you're
that.
going
Yeah.
to have some challenges.
Exactly that. So this is about different listings rather than different SKUs. So it has to be managed properly depending on the taxonomy of how you've chosen to do it. So and
Yes. Yeah. And if you're not familiar with how that works, folks watching this, I would highly recommend review the difference between an ASIN, a SKU, and FN SKU, because you start finding that some of the subtle differences start to pop up as you
yes,
expand internationally.
yes.
Well, good deal. So, all right. So, if anybody watching this live has any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat, and we will bring them up. But just as we're continuing to discuss here, Ricky, I'm curious, what does this process generally take? So I know you said you kind of have somewhat of a rescue service if someone's listing is taken down because they didn't do this. But for the person who's more in the prevention than the cure stage, how long does it take? You know, if you're thinking about like expanding your protein powder to the UK, how long does that generally take to make sure you're compliant?
Well, the product compliance, the label check takes 2 to 3 weeks, depending
Okay.
on how many other sellers SKUs are in the queue beforehand. And we do actually have a
Mm-hmm.
fast track service as well. It typically gets it typically does get lost in the mix because normally a seller would do their tax compliance, their VAT application, around
Correct.
the same time,
Mm-hmm.
launch their other listings and translations. They'll be making an investment in their transition into the UK and the EU market, and so this is one of the things that comes out through that process. They're applying for VAT, they're
Mm-hmm.
getting tax numbers, sorting out shipping, sorting out all of the product upload templates for the old management systems, all at the same time with one of our onboarding team. So the process takes a couple of weeks, and assuming that the label review has some recommendations, the seller that might then go away, do that themselves, engage GE to do that for them from a graphic design perspective, and then decide on how they're going to do it. Send the products as is, have them labeled here, order a batch of products. All of that depends on the seller, their lead times, all that kind of stuff. So how much they've got in stock, what they can afford, all those sorts of things. 101 different reasons of how long that would take. But the actual label review itself takes a couple of weeks.
Okay, good deal. Did have a couple questions come in. Jay-Z, although it's different spelling, asked, we have several listings deactivated due to lack of GFSI or HACCP certificates. I'm familiar with HACCP just from having been in the restaurant industry. Is GFSI similar to HACCP?
Well, these are food safety
Yes.
food safety certificates. So it would appear that if you are lacking those, you probably need to have that label review to see which certificates are required on food. So foods and food supplements do require some degree of testing beforehand, or the ingredients properly. Jay-Z, this is a complex area. I'd recommend getting in touch with a specialist at GE, which Kevin can put you in touch with, or we can pass you details at the end of this call. We'd be happy to give you a bit of time to kind of expand on that front. But for food supplements and food items, there may well be some ingredients in your products which are shown on the label, which have been identified as the quantities not beyond regulations or something along those lines. It's going to be very specific, Jay-Z, I'm afraid, without knowing your
right,
product.
having to get into it a little bit more on a product by product basis. Okay.
Yeah. So if you've got, in effect, if it may well be that there's nothing on your products, the best case scenario is that there's nothing in your products that's an issue here. It's just the lack of certificate. If you're selling on Amazon, they want the certificate to show that that you're compliant. This GFSI in particular, and it may well be that it's a very simple thing to obtain using the right bodies. So if your items are listed and you're losing rankings and you want something to be done urgently, we'd be pleased to help if you get in touch. We'll see if we can help. But yeah, that certificate is probably just an Amazon requirement, and it's possible that other marketplaces wouldn't require it. Amazon's particularly hot on food, but they don't panic, Jay-Z. Those certificates may well be easy to get. It may not be anything to do with the product at all.
Got it. So yeah, so it sounds like Amazon wants this requirement, and I've always had this general observation that Amazon is not proactive when it comes to product compliance. Like they don't go out looking for things to rules to hold people to. It's generally forced upon them.
Yes,
So
absolutely. And actually, it can be really hit and miss depending on it can be really hit and miss as to what the requirements are and how they go about enforcing it, whether that's spot checks, whether that's perhaps a competitor highlighting the situation. That's very common for competitors to highlight compliance-based issues and to have things gated. The downside, of course, is that Amazon is, as you'll know, every Amazon seller will know anywhere in the world, particularly brutal with whether you've got the buy box, whether you are top seller status, whether you're first ranked or 50 ranked or 5,000th ranked. They'll just take you down immediately without asking any questions.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, they're trying to protect their
precisely. Yeah, so
their marketplace.
Yeah,
so,
Jay-Z definitely sounds
yeah.
like
So Jay-Z asked the question: if we're a reseller and do not have access to the manufacturer's facility to conduct any testing, and the manufacturers don't have the certificates.
Okay, that's possibly, Jay-Z, why Amazon's asking for them, because it already knows that they don't have the certificates, and certainly you haven't already provided those. So look, don't panic. It may well be that you just have to have the product looked at independently, which is not expensive. And if then you're the only person selling that, you could find yourself with some lucrative avenues to be able to sell through. So definitely worth progressing on that front.
But I mean, as a reseller, do you see any ways of navigating that, since he doesn't necessarily have the ability, as not the manufacturer, to get some of these certificates? Or do you think there are ways around this?
Typically the reseller would do that to get the certificate, to enable them to be able to sell in that particular region. So typically the reseller would create that, because those items are tested independently. So it's not disaster by any stretch, Jay-Z.
Got it. So it could still be an independent test of some sort to get the documents that are needed. Although if they want some sort of, I'm not familiar with GFSI, but HACCP, if there's, I'm assuming they might have a HACCP if it's HACCP, hazard analysis, critical control points.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of risk assessment piece that comes for HACCP, I'm very surprised if some of that information is not available, or if it isn't, you could, if you can't press upon the manufacturer to do that for you. But these are the safety management procedures of how the food stuff has been made in the first place. So this is surrounding things like, the kitchens that have been used and things like that. So it's not unheard of that is that a seller, the original manufacturer might not have had those testing done, but you could and should very much press on them that needs to be done. What you should do, Jay-Z, very, very importantly, is get your hands on any of the similar US-based certificates and things that they would need from a food perspective in the US, and then we can work out how those can be converted into the UK.
And it sounds like there's independent testing that could happen in a variety of things. Does GEE provide the testing service? If yes, what's the typical cost for the service?
No, we don't. We can do it. We can have it done for you. We don't do it in house. That's product specific. So we don't do it in house, but we could certainly do it on your behalf with a product sample as part of the label. The label review. If you come out from the start in this and you've done a label review, the label review might have a recommendation of these two certificates, or one of these certificates will be required by Amazon. This is how you go and get it. So that'll be how the process works. So I'm afraid I couldn't, in the context of this session, I couldn't tell you exactly how much it's going to cost. But product testing isn't thousands and thousands by any stretch. It's a few hundred at worst.
Got it. And so it sounds like some of this depends on what the actual needs are, depending what the actual product is.
Yes, exactly.
That right?
Yeah, so okay. It's going to be very specific, but pleased to help you, Jay-Z, if you want to move that on further.
Okay, good deal. So that's definitely good to know, and appreciate that. And if anyone else has any questions for Riki, I know some people just like watching this to get a sense of like, okay, is my product potentially in that scenario? But like Jay-Z's situation, where there are some product compliance that has been brought up by Amazon. And so, their listings were deactivated. So it does happen. So this isn't a idle threat that Amazon says they might do it.
Oh no,
As you said,
absolutely an idle threat. No.
Yeah, if their algorithm catches the product in some sort of bucket that they have to comply with, they will take action.
Yes,
Even
and like you say, they'll just stop doing it. So it is, but it's certainly with the due diligence at the beginning, most of this headache and heartache and wallet ache, let's face it, is it goes away because you're compliant right from the outset. We would always recommend.
Jay-Z also said we've sold in Germany before, and the German customs was a nightmare. That's not the first time I've heard that statement. Yeah. We're considering sending inventory from the UK to Germany via European Fulfillment Network program. So that's where Amazon is. It's kind of like NARF is from US to Canada.
Yeah.
We're basically, you're kind of selling it from your UK stock. It's not the same as it was a couple of years ago, but it is a potential option.
Jay-Z, what it sounds like we need to talk to you, see if we can help, but nonetheless, we wouldn't recommend that you send your goods straight to Germany. The customs procedures are very complex, and it's very easy for you to lose time and capacity at the border. We would recommend that you send your goods to the Netherlands. That's the very much more friendly route into the EU, and then you're free and clear. It's like sending goods to California. You're free and clear and off across the United States. So you can move those goods into FBA in Amazon in Germany, for instance, directly from the Netherlands without any further ado. So you should certainly take care on that front. And as the second part of your question, I very much wouldn't recommend sending goods to the UK via EFN, because those goods would need to cross the customs border as each order, which makes them very, very highly susceptible for loss and return, and further on cost to the client, to the end buyer, which they definitely don't like. So I wouldn't recommend.
Got it. Because you're importing the product. It's not.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you're exporting and you're importing. You're exporting from the EU that you've already imported. You've then got to pay tax and duty into the UK because it's a different geographic region. So, I think it sounds like these products are certainly ones that we need to put into perspective there. So Vladdy's question.
Yeah, does the UK approve Chinese labs for doing tests, and is it a better idea to do the testing in the UK?
No, the UK does approve Chinese labs for doing tests. Is it a better idea to do it in the UK? I mean, they're both authorized and regulated to do that. What I would be, you should just absolutely verify the manufacturers, and make it your choice, and independently verify the body that's doing it. It's not uncommon for manufacturers to create those documentations themselves without completing the test. And because there is an element of CE marking which is self-certified. And so you do have to be careful on that front, because that would get picked up immediately that they arrived in the UK. There wouldn't be the registration wouldn't be complete. So, but Vladdy, yeah, absolutely. There are a number of different very good, very highly reputable places that will do CE testing in China. So you don't have to do that.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, this was a good conversation, and I know there's some people that have some questions, maybe even need to follow up on kind of their next steps, and some people potentially watching the replay that need to do that as well. So, actually, it looks like we got one more question before I ask you for your contact info. Vladdy did say thank you, and Jay-Z said we've actually found a handful of profitable products, but since the EFN, Amazon uses UK inventory to fulfill orders from Germany, how do we make sure that the UK inventory was compliant in Germany? Oh, that's a good question. So,
what we're talking about here the whole way through this, JZ, is we're talking about making your products compliant for both the UK and the EU together. So these will be pan EU compliant. So it wouldn't matter whether you were selling just in Germany or in the UK. Your products would be compliant for actually the pan EU program as well as EFN. I mean, you're lucky that your products are compatible and have been invited to participate in EFN. That's not the same for everybody. But very specifically, if when you do that label review, you'll understand what's required to make your products compliant in all those countries. I mean, I'd thoroughly recommend that you split your stock and you put some goods in the UK. The UK market is a third of the European e-commerce opportunity. So, if you're not selling in the UK or you're doing it via EFN, you're definitely missing an opportunity. If you found some profitable products, if you found products which are profitable in Germany, you definitely need to think hard about how you get those goods into the UK market, because the UK market represents equal and easily as big an opportunity as the UK. So there's some real wins here. I have to think.
Yeah, and then one other question was how the EPR in Germany, France works. What else do you need besides the Lucid number? It's the cost for. Does GEE have an EPR service?
Yeah, we can help with the EPR side, and Josie, it's really hard to know without products, commodity codes, where you want to register and that kind of stuff. So it's not difficult, but it's a fraction of a percent of the imported cost, and then you have to be at the point of import. So it's significantly less than the importation duty, typically. Less than 20% of what you're a fraction of just your import duty. But what you have to do is you have to pay the fee based on your forecast annual sales of those products. And then at the end of the year, you review that and make an adjustment and either get some money back or pay a little bit more to top it up. So
gotcha. It looks like the lights just came on your side.
They did. Well, they go off. They went off on a sensor because everyone else has gone home here in the UK.
Oh.
It's 7:00, and then somebody's just come into the room, and the sensors picks it up again. So,
well, I appreciate you doing this. So, for folks who, whether they need a Lucid number or label review or just need to talk to somebody in general, how would they get a hold of you and your team?
Yeah, so you can contact us very easily. I haven't got my details. You can contact us. You can Google us quickly. Global Commerce Experts, which should be at the top of most search engines. And you can also contact us via email, expand@globalecomexperts.com.
Gotcha. And I do have a link in the description. So
yeah, please do. If you could, that will be a useful way if you have any further questions surrounding label compliance are quite tricky because they're very specific to the products themselves.
We have to speak in kind of broad stroke generalities.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Point,
so
it could be different based on the product.
Yeah, but we can drive a bit further on that. If we're able to talk to clients.
Okay, specific. Good deal. Well, Jay-Z did say thank you very much for the session. It was very helpful. So glad it was helpful, Jay-Z. And for those of you who watched the replay and made it all the way through, thank you so much. And thank you to Riki for providing this excellent information.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.